Thank you very much, Chairman Wu. Maybe to start the debate, from what I heard this morning, and I think there's a large consensus of the different opportunities offered by the digital transformation, both on the Chinese side and on the European side. There are also some challenges and concerns, and I would like to take the opportunity to pick your brains on trying to find some solutions and new ideas in order to resolve the different concerns that have been raised this morning. So the first issue and first solution hopefully we could find is about the cooperation between the EU and China with respect to the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road initiative. It has been said earlier that there has been some resistance, concerns, questions, and a different point of view with respect to the PRI initiative. Do you think what should we do more from the Chinese angle and European angle, I'm talking about government, private sector, to engage into that digital Silk Road and avoid missing the opportunity? Because I know that everyone agrees that there is a lot of opportunities for everyone, but what can we do to transform that idea into a very successful project? I think I would like to start from the EU perspective, and maybe Chairman could respond to that first question.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that question. I think when we are talking about cooperation between two entities like China and the European Union, it's important that both must bring something to the table. Otherwise, there is not a balance and there's not an equilibrium. So that is my first point of view, that you have to develop your own strengths here in Europe to be a valuable counterpart for China. And that means that we have to develop that digital single market I was just talking about. So let's take it from the European point of view. We have a wealth of industrial research and public sector data which can be unlocked to feed these AI systems. So it's absolutely necessary for us in Europe to make data sharing easier and open up more data. That's number one. And then we're talking about data for reuse, data from the public sector in particular, such as on public utilities, environment, research and health data. That's one thing we have to do ourselves, it's our homework. The second thing is that we need investments, we need money, because there's a lot of money in China. You're a very rich country, dear friends. We have money to burn. We don't have, so we have to find the money. So we have to find combinations of money from the public and the private sector for research, for innovation, by both. I already mentioned this, better access to public data. Because if we really want to boost the EU's technological and industrial capacity and AI uptake, we have to work on that. But there is another issue. And the other issue is that new technologies, in my view, should be based on values. So we need to ensure an appropriate ethical and legal framework together. It has to be based, I have to say, so on European Union's values. It has to be in line with the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the EU. But it's also a global issue. And if you notice these concerns of data collection, data control, data integrity, data ownership, they need to be solved. We need to work on that. So what Europe could do and could bring to the table is take the lead on this global debate on ethical principles like accountability, like transparency, like privacy, and like intellectual property, and not to forget consumer rights, consumer protection. How to avoid digital mistakes and how to rectify them. We don't want to have any more sorcerers' apprentices. We are not in need of them, so we have to avoid it. So this is something we have to look into in common. And that brings me to data protection. You know, when we talk about building digital trust, this is essential. And digital trust is not only essential in Europe, where we now have the general data protection regulation, but we have to ensure this digital trust along the digital Silk Road. I think this is another issue that we have to cooperate on. And yes, it does offer new opportunities, the digital Silk Road, for China, for the EU. But that's another issue. It should always be a two-way system. We have a two-way system. And that means reciprocity. And that means opening up markets for EU companies in China. They're still a little bit problematic. We need to have some more transparency in Chinese company governance structures. Yes, I can see you smile. You know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Because geopolitically, this One Belt, One Road initiative, it's China's land-based connection to Europe. And the digital Silk Road, in addition to that, it will also have a global effect on trade, on economy, and on prosperity. So my last point is about money. As I mentioned, China has a lot of money. We have to find the right equilibrium to investments in Europe and investments in China, because otherwise it will be an unbalanced digital and Silk Road, and I don't think that would be in the benefit of our two countries. So, yes, I think I leave it to that. Maybe I put some more dilemmas on the table, but I also try to mention solutions and where cooperation can bring the solution for these issues.
Thank you, but that was already a good start, right, in terms of presenting all the different challenges and perspectives from the EU. Chairman, would like you to react to that? What can we do more on the Chinese side to strengthen that cooperation and common interest between the EU and China on the digital Silk Road?
For digital science and technology, we would like to go hand in hand with European partners. But I think probably there are at least two issues we are concerned. One is actually the political factors elements. You know, the serious US, it is said it will be extended to other countries, including European countries. We got a lot of troubles if we acquire some company in US or invest FDI in US. Sometimes reasonable, sometimes it's not reasonable. But I think the serious actually there's a political factor, and it is said it will be extended to other countries. And also we are afraid of if we have some collaboration between European partners with us, and you have your business in US, and if US bullying you and bullying us, how can we do? And another issue probably is the culture. Just Mary mentioned, actually China is not so rich, even if it's rich just for one or two generations. But for European people, it is really the noble family for many, many generations. A lot of things, very educated, very, elegant and noble. But sometimes, if investors from China, when they make the exchange, communication with the European partners, sometimes the culture will crash each other. So for that reason, probably the two sides. One is the China side. We needed to improve or to boost our cultural level. And also for the European side, we would like to have more understanding from the European side. But I think the demand and also the supply is very strong for each other. And especially for the market-driven force is very strong in China. But I think Europe is innovation-driven, is stronger than China or other countries.
Thank you.
Yes, we do have some strong points. I think we're looking at the robotic industry, our scientists, our research institutions, they are really very good. But you mentioned something else, and I think that's very, very important. It's about the cultural differences. Sometimes we use the same words, but the words have a different meaning, or they have a different emotional value. And that's something we have to learn from each other, because at the basis of all good cooperation and of all good business-like cooperation, there's always trust. And trust doesn't come very easily. You have to work on that. It's not only about digital trust, it's also about trust between people. And trust is also at the bottom line of our, how shall I put it, what we need in our people's minds. Because if they feel uncomfortable because their jobs are going to disappear and they don't have a perspective of something else, then we have an uproar. We don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want it. So that's why I think it's so very important to put an emphasis on education and training, the new skills being needed. Jobs will disappear, but that has happened all the time.
Yes.
But new jobs will come if you have to prepare the youth of today, but also those who are working today, the workforce of today, for the jobs of tomorrow. And that's something else I think we could learn from each other.
Yes.
That's what I would like to add.
If the cooperation between you and me, no problem.
Yeah, okay, let's give it a try.
I like this. It's a very dynamic debate, so that's what we needed to start that first panel discussion. Maybe Lars, would like to share your perspective from the energy sector, point of view. How can we make this green and digital cycle happen? Any views on that?
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I think, first of all, the energy production, as I mentioned earlier, is not specific to any country. China is apparently affected a lot because of its sheer size, yeah, definitely, and because it's a heavy weight also in industrial production. But the challenges are equally the same everywhere in the world. We need to shift, and we need to shift very, very quickly. And we also have to bear in mind, when we talk about energy, 25 years ago, the energy production was by more than 90% in the hand of the states, of the government. And now we are seeing a huge shift away from governmental-backed energy production to private.
How much? 25?
No, 25 years ago, 90% plus X was state-owned. And now we are shifting towards a very different scenario. And to be brutal honest with you, money goes where it feels safe and looks for a certain return. And that will not stop at boundaries, and that will also affect China, of course. And what we need in order to steer the money towards the right industry and into the right technology, which can only be the renewable energy in the future, means that we need transparency, and we need, for this transparency, we need solid data access, etc. And that is a global challenge. But even more so in emerging markets, where we fortunately see renewable energy coming now, because we have now hit grid parity in terms of pricing. So countries like Mexico, Saudi Arabia, they are now all joining the club because they don't have to pay subsidies any longer. And that changes the landscape dramatically. And also think about state guarantees are falling apart. So the power price will be determined by the market, either by individually agreed power purchase agreement or on the spot market. And you need fintechs also in order to make this happen. That these markets across globes, because as an owner of an energy asset, you don't care who your buyer is as long as he's paying you. So it's not a national thing any longer. So we are crossing borders with a new business model.
Thank you. Maybe to make a transition with the two topics we've just covered. One of the concerns we've seen, and I think that's quite similar to what we've seen in the energy sector, is that this new digital transformation has enabled major players who have quite a dominant position or an important market share. And I'd like to ask Tony, I mean, do you see any risk of having all this digital economy being in the hands of say 6, 7 big players? And if it's the case, if it's the risk, what can we do in order to make sure that this the benefits of this digital economy is not shared between a few companies, but is a benefit for all individuals?
Well, I think there is a risk. So, and I think one of the ways of addressing this is through better governance. And I think there's a responsibility for these large companies to improve their own governance. And there's a role for governments and particularly intergovernmental organisations, to insist that their governance is improved. And it's good to see that things like the World Economic Forum are taking this very seriously. The European Union, I think, is in a strong position to be able to insist that there's better governance. And the big companies say that they can't be more transparent because that's risky for them, that people will steal their secrets. But they don't need to declare what their algorithms are, or even too much detail of how they work. What they need to declare is what their goals are, and how their goals mesh with the sort of societal responsibilities that they have, and with the goals that governments have, and to ensure that there's alignment there. Google, I think, several years ago was going to set up an internal governance committee, an ethics committee. I know from one of the people who was approached about that the only committee they have is made up of senior management, and really it's a crisis management committee, it's not an ethics committee. So these ethics committees need to be brought into large corporations, and they need to include people from outside the company, and they need to create real governance. And I think that's the best way forward. I mean, the alternative will be for governments to insist on regulation, but the internal governance is a better path.
Chairman, we would like you to share your view on the role of the bats in China, and is it a concern that we could have a dominant position, how to resolve that?
But I have a question to Tony. I mean, as the robust technology develops better and better, can we see someday, or let's say earlier, the robots for service, for family, is so well developed, it replaces the family members. And it happens, if it happens, what will be the society, and what will be the regulation for that?
Well, I think it's a very good question. And one of the impacts, I think, of seeing more robots in our personal lives, in our public lives, will be to change the role of work. And we talk about robots replacing human jobs, but I think people do a lot of work at the moment that's unpaid, and it's called caring for your family. Currently and historically, this work has been done by women, and they always haven't been paid for that work. So there is the opportunity now, as robots do more of the traditional jobs, to think about redefining what we reward people for doing, and we can reward people for looking after each other. I think that's particularly important for my generation, because we are going to live very long lives, and we are going to, for the last 20, 30 years of those lives, need increasing amount of help. And we can get some of that help from robots, but we can also help each other more. And we can reward the younger generation, who we're going to be relying on to generate wealth, for also providing us with that help. So I think we need to redefine what we mean by work. What I realize increasingly from studying the challenges of robotics is that historically we have seen the hard challenges, the ones that we reward well, as being things that actually AI is going to do more better than we can. So sort of the decision making, some of that will be done better by AI. The pattern recognition is done better by AI. And we will begin to realize actually that human skills that are complementary to AI are the ones that have been traditionally well rewarded. And those are having an understanding of the broader context of knowing why things are important and significant. AIs right now have no idea. They don't know this world. They just see patterns in data. It's humans that recognize why those patterns are important and apply that knowledge. And the ability to interact socially with one another, to physically interact with people, to give physical care, that's going to be tremendously hard to automate. And we will recognize that actually that's a role for humans rather more than for robots.
And do you think that, you mentioned during your introductory remarks that the universal basic income could be a solution to resolve that issue of people losing their job. Do you think it's a great idea, and how do you finance that?
Do you want to?
You want to?
Well, just after a few words, you know, when I look into what happened in the history of mankind, we had many revolutions and transitions. Jobs disappeared and others came to in their place. I fully agree with you that artificial intelligence robots can be very helpful and can be very good for the prosperity of mankind. But there's one thing I would like to put on the table: decision making. By the end of the day, decision making should be done by human people, by humans, helped by robots, I understand. But let me just give you one example. Who is going to push the red button to drop a bomb? Who's going to do that? I think these are other ethical questions that we have to answer in future. And the same goes for the ESG criteria you were just talking about. Governance and transparency. I don't think that companies are going to do that by themselves. I don't think that at all. They need governance, and they need investors to ask the right questions about these issues, and they need the active stake and shareholders to push them into the direction that we just have been describing. Otherwise they won't do that. So that's one of the things we have to discuss as well. Who's going to have ultimate responsibility of what robots are doing, and how to see to it that these big companies are not taking over the world. That all these criteria about transparency are there, and that we know what's going to happen. Bring outsiders in, so that all these ethical questions are really being addressed. Sorry for the long answer.
No worries. We have a whole day to respond to all these important questions. Thank you for that. Last night, you react to what has been said on robotics and the energy sector, because I know we still have a couple of minutes.
Just very briefly, when I was listening to your examples, sorry that I very often drift to the energy sector again, but it touches your point on because who's making the decision. So on automotive, for example, when we think of autonomous driving, the computer has to make a decision, because otherwise things will probably go horribly wrong in this case. So there's a slight different opinion to that. Yeah, but there's also an ethical question. Yeah, whom are you saving? On the other hand, thinking of your examples of artificial intelligence, in the future, a lot more people will drive electric vehicles. And people today look at electric vehicles. Okay, they need to have a battery inside there. Artificial intelligence will lead to, or probably will pave the way of making cars storage. Yeah? So it's a storage center. You have batteries not in there only to drive your car, but to feed the grid. Yeah? So I don't know whether you heard about that example from Volkswagen. In their plant factory in Leipzig, they want to get rid of the grid at all. They only produce energy by old batteries. They take old car batteries out and use them as storage and as the source of that. So there's a lot of questions surrounding that, what is possible, and it will change our lives. I totally agree with you. By the way, that example of how we can allocate money in a different way already exists. I'm coming from Upper Bavaria, so in this part of the country, this is very agricultural. And the farmers are very often paid for doing nothing, just keeping the land as it is. Yeah, so that's a kind of compensation which already exists. Yeah, so but these are all questions surrounding us, not only the energy sector, of course, but technology is a driver. And one little other aspect in terms of industry, I agree with you. We are now moving towards a scenario where it's only a handful large, let's say, cloud providers worldwide. That's a thing which we really have to consider. On the other hand, I am not so hesitant when it comes to transparency in terms of the industry itself, because you know what happened? 5 years ago, nobody wanted to share the data. Now everyone is keen to understand what the other is doing. Now he wants to have a benchmarking performance test to see whether he's doing good or not. And it will go all on the table in the future.
Share and stakeholders influence. Yeah.
Exactly.
Can I come back on this point about
Sure.
decision?
Because we're running out of
I'll
time.
be very quick. So what I said is in my speech was, well, we cannot predict, we cannot control. We're right now in a position where we have decision makers, leaders of countries, making decisions on the basis of limited information, and largely in the dark about what will happen as a consequence of those decisions. So we can make much better decisions once we can predict. And AIs can be the tool to help us predict. Really, if the AI predicts that you need to reduce CO2 emissions, and it's not just an AI, the IPCC, it's the combination of very powerful modeling tools and the best scientific minds. So it's a human AI symbiotic system which is making these predictions. And we can do the same thing in other spheres, in healthcare and the economy. We can work out what's a better solution to these problems if we use AI appropriately. And once that system has told you how to control, then it's an easy decision for the politicians to say, this is what we have to do.
Thank you. I think that concludes the first panel discussion. So I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for their contribution, for all the open questions they have asked and which will be answered in the following roundtables. Just before ending that session, we would like to just broadcast a short video on the China Academy of Science before moving to the next panel session. Thank you very much.